Okay, picking up where we left off, I just want to add a few more things to this kind of part one, intro one section here. We'll go ahead and press run so we remind ourselves where we're at. And you see we've got our little line drawing tool here, following my mouse from the center. But there are a few extra things that we can add to this we did in class the other day. Let's start with just a few keywords that we can add to setup. So right now we have size. Another one that we will use pretty frequently is smooth. And smooth just is a simple command for dealing with the anti-aliasing, you know, the jagged lines that you have. So we'll go ahead and press play here again. And you might not see it as much on mine. You certainly will see it on your screen, some of this, because the I have this retina display on mine, so sometimes when doing screen captures it's not as clear. But it's going to smooth the edges, so I'm just going to put that in there because basically every sketch that I ever run, I just turn the smoothing on. The parameters for smoothing are 2, 4, 6, or 8, depending on your graphics card. I don't think it goes to 16. All right, that's the first thing. The next part is color. We haven't really talked about how to change the color or the elements for our line, so go ahead and do that. So there are two elements that kind of like style elements, if you want to think of it that way, that go with line, and one would be the stroke, and I'll just leave it like that for now, and then the stroke weight. Oops. All right. So the parameters for these. For stroke weight, it's just going to be one number. It's a float that goes back into this. So we'll just leave that at 1. So that'll be the thickness of the line. But that could be like 0.5 or 0.2 or something like that. Like, let's make it let's do 0.5. Now stroke, let's go ahead and pop up the reference. And let's resize this a little bit. Okay, so just like other functions that you would have in the language here with processing, you can have multiple parameter sets, I guess is the way. The syntax for the parameters can be different. So we can put in RGB values or gray values or alpha RGB with alpha. So let's just look at how you would do that. So let's say right now we had it at the default is a black line, so that would be 0. So the default is RGB values is the color mode that processing uses, and they go from 0 to 255, like a lot of programs. So let's just make this a little bit lighter. Let's say 80. And if I want to, let's give it a little bit of transparency. So let's say it's 50. And we'll go ahead and play that. So you can say I have a real soft line here now on the screen. Almost build up some of the shading. Right. So it's like having a little pencil, I guess. Weird to be talking about it that way, but that's happens to be the case here. Right. So you can see a lot of advantages with just a few little changes to the color space. So let's also go to add a color itself. So we'll choose the color selector. Now this is it's just in the tools palette with processing, and this is just a way to get an idea of what the numerical values are. And you can see you get the hue, saturation, and brightness values. We're not using that color space, but we certainly will later in the semester. Right now we're using RGB values, and we also have the hex value from kind of web, if you're a web person and want to use that. So let me go ahead and put those at 193, 37, 37, and let's again use alpha value. Just close that. All right. You can see we now have a red line. We'll go back and let's add another element, ellipse, and the ellipse has 4 parameters. So this would be, let's go with mouse X and mouse. Oops. mouse Y. That's where the XY coordinates are going to be. And let's say 75 and 75. Right, so you can see where it's almost like a little paintbrush on top of this. It's actually a little bit big, so let's change that. Let's make that 25. And let's go ahead and change the color values for this. So we'll leave the stroke where this is at, and we'll talk about this in a second, but I'm going to change the fill. So fill is exactly the filling of a ellipse or a rectangle or something like that. So let's just use gray. Well, actually, let's use some kind of gray. Let's do 180, but then we'll use transparency again. So you can see here I have four values, so R, G, B, and alpha. And fill here, we have two values. Again, which is totally correct in the syntax. When there's just two values, processing will see this as grayscale value and an alpha value. So let's go ahead and play that. All right, so you can see we have this little, think of it a paintbrush, I guess, if you want to. It's semi-transparent. We can make that, let's make that fill even more. Let's go down to 50. The lower that number, the more transparent it's going to be. All right. Let's see how we're doing on time here, 6 minutes. Okay. So let's go ahead and change the stroke value. And let's set this stroke. Let's do it as a gray. So let's say 100 by 100. All right. Now, so what I really want you to see from this, let that sit for a second, is this order of operations. So in the SketchUp, or in the setup, we'd see set up our sketch to run, and put right here, do this once. Okay. So it's just going to do this once, save those commands, and then it's going to go on to the next thing, and keep looping through these instructions for the draw over and over again. Okay. So until I tell this to stop, it's just going to keep going through here. So by defining the stroke in the stroke way here, now it gets put onto line, and then I come down here and change this, the fill and the stroke, and it comes back. And so if I went up here and commented those out, you can see that we've lost the color line because it's obeying the stroke right here. Okay, it goes through, it's using kind of a default, and then it loops back up, and it just, now that's the command. We haven't told it anything different. So just keep in mind, and we'll talk about this throughout the semester, I'm assuming, just that order of operations as it's working. All right. Next, let's talk about the background. So background again gets a color, so let's just make this white for now. So we're going to do this in two places. I've done background up here in setup. Let's go ahead and press run. So you can see I have a white background I'm now drawing on top of it. And as we're drawing, was noted in class, it's not clearing the canvas. It's just all piling up, which is great if you want to make a drawing. The goal is to make some kind of image, and then once it's all done, save it into something you could print out or whatever. But let's say you were making an interactive visualization or something, and you wanted to see different results per frame. Just go ahead and take backdrop out of there. So I'll cut that, paste it right here, and then we'll just run. And when I'm running that, I'm using Command R, would be Control R on the PC. So you can see I just have one. I just have one line and one ellipse on the screen, rather faint because of the transparency. And this is happening because every time it goes through, it's clearing the screen. It's painting, it's covering everything that happened the previous loop. And then it just redoes it again, and we get to the top, and it puts everything to white, and then it goes through again. Right? So there are ways to add some fading over time. I won't include that in this tutorial. Let's go ahead and put this back up here. Let's see. So we've covered a little bit of color. Fill, stroke, stroke weight are things that we would use for lines and ellipses and rectangles and things like that. You could spend some time making a little drawing after this. Oh, and there's one other thing that we wanted to do. As was noted in class when we start, at the beginning, processing hasn't picked up where my mouse is because it's not over the canvas. Now that it's over the canvas, it starts drawing. So it's creating that line that was there in the corner, which people did not want. It was kind of disrupting. It's like a mistake in their drawing. So we went ahead and put a little bit of logic in there to get rid of that. There'd be several ways, many ways you could do that. We could create some functions where we said if we press a button, this is when we want to draw or something like that. And we'll deal with those later, but I just wanted to do something simple to introduce you to the idea of logic. So we're going to do an if statement. Add a couple returns in here. All right, so let's say if we're going to use something called frame count. So this is just how many times through the loop is greater than, I think everyone knows the greater or less than symbols. Let's say 30. And we'll go ahead and put a bracket here. And then we'll put a bracket right at the end. And then I'm going to hit Command T, which is an auto formatting, which will indent your code in the way that it should be, at least most of the time. Sometimes cause some problems. So right now, if this condition is met, okay, this is a conditional statement. If this ends up being true, go ahead and do all this stuff, everything that's in this little block. If not, it's just not going to do anything. And what we want it to do is wait till it gets to frame 30. Now we can make this number anything, but 30 should be enough so that when I pull up the little drawing, you can see I have enough time to get my mouse over the screen, and processing has enough time to say, oh, there it is, and then it starts drawing. So there's a little bit of lag there at the very beginning where the event of the mouse being over the screen is registered. And we could do this many different ways. We could certainly add this up and put some other little function in there that says if I press this button or when this key or this mouse is pressed, we're going to do that. But this is just a simple way of introducing some logic into our sketch and fixing that one little problem. So now you can see I have a lot of control of where I'm drawing. All right, so I think I'll leave that there and post this. In next tutorial, we'll probably start talking about variables.